Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. As always, we're here to keep you up to date with the latest news, tech, content, and wisdom from the world of marketing. And as always, my co-host is a man on a mission to demystify digital marketing. He is the host of the Content Marketing Studio video podcast. Please welcome Monsieur Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction. It is a pleasure, of course, to spend time with a man who's also on a mission to keep marketing simple, the voice of the Marketing and Finance Podcast and the host of the Rogdoll video series. I give you Monsieur Roger Edwards.
Oh, Pascal, we are here for episode 69. Just one away from, I was going to say the magic 70. I don't think there is actually a magic 70, but 70 still seems like a bit of a milestone. And Pascal, we have got a lot to talk about today. The usual mix of news and tech and shout outs. But we're going to talk about a film today. Later in the film marketing section, it's called Uncharted. I know nothing about this film, and apparently it's based upon a game which you play a lot. And I've never even heard of the game either. So I'm in for a bit of a treat today, I think.
You are. This is probably one of the best loved video games franchise for the PlayStation players. I have played all 4 video games over the last 10 years, particularly number 3 and 4, played them almost once a year just for a bit of fun. And I'm nervous, but we'll see what the marketing campaign is like and see whether or not it is indeed worth our money as well as our time.
Good. Looking forward to it. So, without further ado, let's start with In the News.
And we begin with this news. More than half of marketers are considering moving jobs this year. Higher wages, learning new skills, and the prospect of fresh challenges are key motivations, according to Marketing Week's 2022 Career and Salary Survey.
Heinz has taken out a full-page print ad in The Guardian, apologising to the British public and Hounds finder Henry Heinz for taking 150 years to develop a range of pasta sauces, because nothing so ridiculously good has come so ridiculously late, is the strapline.
Okay, well, LinkedIn will continue with its promise to make work for women this year with 2 strategic partnerships. The first one is with a national sponsorship deal with the UEFA Women's Euro 2022 football tournament.
New Peloton CEO Barry McCarthy believes the brand could revitalise sales by switching to a new subscription model with App Store potential.
NatWest is pledging to cut ties with companies that lack credible decarbonisation plans, and the bank promises to stop doing business with coal companies and some oil and gas majors.
Airbnb has reported its strongest ever fourth quarter results, driven by higher revenue and increased marketing efficiency. CEO Brian Chesky said, Airbnb now looks at the role of marketing as one of education, not to buy customers.
Absolutely, where Burger King wants to create more impactful advertising with greater attention to its multi-billion-dollar Whopper brand. The fast food chain will cut low-volume products from its menu and pledges to refocus on its core offer.
And finally, the cost of living concerns driven by rising fuel and energy prices have led to a 7% drop in optimism for family prospects to 40%, according to Marks & Spencer's Family Matters data. By contrast, during the national lockdown in March 2021, optimism stood at 51%. So people are obviously feeling a little less optimistic, but I want to talk about Heinz. Are you a Heinz baked bean and Heinz tomato soup fan, Pascal?
I have become a Heinz baked beans fan. I mean, I must confess, when I arrived in the UK in 91, I had no clue what it was. And in fact, if you know the tin well, the design, there's nothing, because I needed to actually have an image of sort to know what I was buying, but I could see people buying it. And when I was sharing a flat with my fellow students, the baked beans on toast seemed to be the kind of the regular fare. And so I had to go. I even went for the special one, Roger, with the little sausages in it.
Oh,
and
yes.
I'm fully converted.
Yeah. Now, this is interesting that they are now going to launch some pasta sauces. Now, on the one hand, I assumed that somewhere in the Heinz 57 varieties, there were already pasta sauces. I was attracted by this news item because I love the strapline, because nothing so ridiculously good has come so ridiculously late. And the advert, effectively, the founder of Heinz saying, I'm sorry it's taken 150 years to develop pasta sauces, just feels like a really clever idea to me. Having said that, I'm not a massive fan of the Heinz tomato taste. The tomato soup just looks like red soup to me. It's got a taste of its own. I don't particularly think it tastes like tomatoes. So I'm not that optimistic, despite the amazing campaign. I'm not that optimistic for the actual taste of the pasta sauces themselves, but I shall give them a try.
And I agree with you. I think it's very clever. There's nothing like wit, when you do an advertising campaign. And I think also what is interesting is that you're now being obviously in the receiving end of emails where people pretend to be apologizing to in fact hook you in. It's almost like its own version of a clickbait. How many times have you had an email people saying, "Oops, I made a mistake," and then you kind of go, "Well, what is this?" Well, you do the first few, and then eventually I just delete them now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the jury's out, but
Uh-huh.
we'll get back to you in a later episode once we've tried these Heinz pasta sauces. Now, I was a little bit alarmed, Pascal, by this statistic from Marketing Week's career and salary survey that suggests that more than half of marketers are considering moving jobs. Now, looking down the article a little bit further, they were talking about the things you would normally expect. People want higher salaries, people aren't satisfied with their current role, people want to learn new skills. But I wondered whether this is a consequence as well, Pascal, about what we've always talked about on this show, that marketing isn't just about the tactics of SEO and email and content. It's actually quite a strategic thing as well. And I just wonder whether the marketers that consider leaving their jobs are actually the ones who have become tactified, if that's the right word, or are focused on those tactical elements. And actually, the new skills that they want to learn could still be within the roles that they have if they were allowed to spread into the more strategic elements of the marketing role as well.
I think this announcement works also, I think, as a barometer for across all sectors, all functions, and all industries. You can't deny that the last 2 years has really helped people take stock and consider what they want to do with their time, with their lives, with their career. But just building on what you've just said, I hear from my mentees, I hear from my customers that despite their efforts to be more strategic, the powers that be always look for the tactics.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is so unique of the marketing function is the amount of people across the organization that seems to have an opinion and want to critique your work. I mean, you would
Yes.
never be subjected to that level of scrutiny or sometimes, frankly, uninvited opinions if you work in HR, if you work in health and safety, if you work in operations, financial management. Do you know what I mean? Like all the other business functions, people just let you get on with it and then they may have a suggestion. But this one, the moment you present anything to do with a plan or the execution, you have an army of people that will tell you what's good, bad, and ugly about it.
That is so true. And I remember that from my big corporate days myself. I wouldn't have dreamed of challenging the finance director or the customer service director or the HR director, as you say. But every time we presented a marketing plan, it was picked apart bit by bit, torn apart in some respects by everybody. It's almost as if everybody thought they had permission and carte blanche just to completely tread all over everything we were trying to do.
And I think that I have some sympathy with that situation because everybody can reflect what it's like to be a consumer. I mean, your news about Marks and Spencers and so on. Everybody has access to a computer. Everybody's been subjected to advertising, not marketing. Let's be very careful here. So, but I think it's back to the leaders to set boundaries.
Yeah.
I'll talk actually part of my content spotlight about meetings and email circulations. And I was mentoring somebody and he was asking, should I send that to, essentially it was about 4 or 5 people. I said, no, just send that to just those 2 individuals. They are part of the lines of communication. So I think part of the return to work, which is a bit of a theme today, just go back to the lines of communication, go back to the authority and the sign-offs. And there ought to be, particularly for the marketing functions, elements where you could be more or less a free agent, within the plan that's been signed off by the board or by the leaders. Just get on, hit your milestones, report by exception, and things will be so much better.
Absolutely right. So the last one I wanted to talk about, Pascal, was Airbnb. Now, I can't remember exactly which episode it was. It was probably getting on for about a year ago now. But in the news, we talked about Airbnb switching its marketing strategy away from trying to buy customers and effectively just sell, to more of a brand building exercise based around education. Now, I've always been of the opinion that, especially through content marketing, marketing is a very educational role. You're educating people about your products. You're educating people about how your products and services can help solve their problems. You're educating them about the price. You're educating them about how to buy it, etc. And it seems to be paying off for Airbnb. Strongest ever fourth quarter results.
For me, what is interesting, even if you go on Airbnb now and the way in which they present themselves and the way in which, that you've got those drop-down menus and the navigation and the search function, it feels a lot more like that education, that really customer service approach to it, as opposed to the kind of things you might see, let's say, on a flight-only website where they can't wait for you to share your credit card details. And so not only are they claiming, that the marketing isn't more about education than buying customers, but actually the evidence suggests that that's the case.
Yeah, and I'm hearing good things about Airbnb at the moment. I mean, in fairness, I haven't been in an Airbnb for over 2 years for the obvious reason of the pandemic, but I do hear people saying, a lot of the properties are now, they have daily cleaning like you would expect to get in a hotel. They may go as far as to stock a minibar for you. They may go as far as to stock a fridge for you. They're really pushing the boundaries. Whereas, you see all of these hotel chains constantly being launched, and they're always a version of the Premier Inn style model or a version of the higher end Marriott model, but they're not doing anything different. And I think that the hotels sort of ignored Airbnb in the early days as a sort of irritant that will go away, and it didn't, and it's growing. And I think the hotels are still ignoring Airbnb, and all the time Airbnb are chipping away at the hotel market.
That reminds me of a cousin to hospitality, which is tourism. As you know, I started my career in marketing tourism. And in the 90s, I went to a conference, and it was the early days of ebookers.com and lastminute.com. I remember one of the CEOs of the big tour operators, who are no longer with us, which I think is very telling, stood on stage and called those online platforms parasites that would not last.
That's
as a young marketer, I was thinking, oh my God, this is so wrong. I can't stay in this industry for much longer if that's going to be the case.
Yeah, no, it just goes to show, I mean, it's a good strategy. It seems to be working. And as we've always said, if you can make your marketing engaging and educational, then it's going to work and it's going to get you those customers without that annoying, in your face selling. So Pascal, lots of great stuff in the news today. I probably would have wanted to have talked about Peloton as well, but I think we need to move on now. So shall we shine the content spotlights and move on to the next part of the show? Well, in this section of the show, Pascal and I highlight a piece of content that's caught our attention over the last week. It could be a video, could be a blog, could be a podcast. So, Pascal, what have you got in your spotlight this week?
Oh, this week I'm going to surprise you as well as our viewers and listeners. It's a book that I've chosen to go through. The title is The Joy of Work, 30 Ways to Fix Your Work Culture and Fall in Love with Your Job Again by Bruce Daisley. So I'm going to begin by telling you a bit more about Bruce and the raison d'etre behind the book. And I'm going to tell you a bit more of a why situation, why I chose this book, and give you a bit of an overview. Now, Bruce Daisley has had the pleasure of a career of taking him through the corridors, meeting rooms and boardrooms of the likes of YouTube, Google, and Twitter, and therefore has been really at the at the stage of observing digital adoption and transformation from the sources themselves. And he became just intrigued and fascinated over the years about what makes a team perform, what makes an organization essentially an enjoyable place to work, as opposed to sometimes being the contrary. And as is often the case with people who are intrigued and launch a bit of an investigation, he then decided to record his findings on a podcast, which you may have heard of, called Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat. That then became a kind of presentation, if I'm not mistaken, even a TED Talk. It became a book, and now also becomes a newsletter with the title Make Work Better. Now, I had the pleasure of listening to his presentation in 2018-19, I believe. And the reason why I was reminded of this book, The Joy of Work by Bruce Daisley, is because for the last few days, Roger, during my mentoring session, during those sessions where, forgive me, I'm meant to be giving advice on the wonders of marketing, particularly digital marketing, I spent most of the time dealing with individuals who felt overwhelmed and
Mhm,
actually ran the risk of just being too stressed out. And
mhm.
the common denomination was the return to work, the return to team meetings, and the return to almost, if you like, a very, very busy day with all the traveling and so on. And it just made me realize that people had been not kind enough to themselves. Without essentially realizing they are rushing back into this, almost this quest for back to normal, but in doing so are just hitting a wall because it's just too demanding after the 2 years that we've gone through. And I think also, if you think back to Bruce Daisley and his work, from him, the position is very clear. The new technology that he's observed and that he was obviously instrumental in promoting through his work at YouTube, Google, and Twitter, the new tech is now getting in the way of happiness at work, is a source of stress. And he was going to argue that just because we're now working longer hours, and I'll come back to that, there's no real discernible increase in productivity. So the casualties of this way of working, particularly the last 2 years, where by the fact that we could just go to our desk and laptops much more readily, some of the working weeks have gone from 40 odd to 70 hours a week, Roger, which
Oh,
is
goodness
quite
me.
extraordinary. Now, when you're working remotely, it may be possible to cope. I wouldn't recommend it, but it may be possible to cope. But then if you try and do that as well as returning to work, as well as traveling and trying to get into the meetings and so on, it's just not going to work. There's going to be some casualty in terms of the people, but also creativity, productivity, fulfillment, and enjoyment, according to Bruce Daisley, is going to be the first thing to go. So the book, The Joy of Work, is something I want people to read for themselves. It's very easy to follow as a reminder of the way in which you could be kind as a colleague, as a team leader, as the ultimate owner of the business, because you want to really, really be careful about this return to work. And the book is lovely because there's a lot of personal stories as well as workplace psychology research. The book has got 3 main chapters, one called Recharge, one called Sync, spelled SYNC, and one called Buzz. Now, Recharge suggests that there are 12 ways in which you can enhance your performance and making work less awful. That these are Bruce Daisley's words. In Sync, it's about 8 ways to fix, 8 fixes, to make your team much closer. And the Buzz are the 10 secrets he's observed of energized teams. And for me, it's this idea of the last 2 years have been quite extraordinary. We've not had to be concerned to the degree that perhaps we should have about the impact of the tech. Let's just be careful. Let's just have a plan. Let's take it slow. And if the joy of work, can help you, then do consider it. I would close on this, Roger. One of the introduction paragraph from Bruce is this idea of this book should be shared and read by others. So here it is. If you're a viewer and listener of Two Geeks and Martin podcast, I have a copy here. And for the podcast listeners, I'm going to go through the pages for you. So you've heard it now and you can see the book. Get in touch and I will send a copy of The Joy of Work to you.
Fantastic. A giveaway. A giveaway. Well done, Pascal. I mean, this is really, really interesting. I read another article this week on this very subject, and it was saying that, people going back to the cinema has almost gone back to normal from before the pandemic. People going out for dinner, it's almost back to normal. People going on holiday is sort of getting back to normal now that the restrictions are being lifted. But people going back to the office is still way down. It's something like about 35 to 40%. And that's because they don't want to get back into that stifling environment that they were in before. And as you say, they don't want to add half an hour, an hour and a half's travel on congested trains or congested roads on either side of their expanded day.
Mm.
And again, I know a lot of people who work in big corporates who spend even more time in meetings now than they ever did because of the convenience of Zoom and Teams. But somebody needs to grab hold of some of these meeting cultures and think about the health and well-being of their employees and do something about it, because as you say, it can't last. And we don't have to go back to the old normal and try and, layer on some of the technology. As we've said, it is time to completely rethink how we do things.
Completely, and you won't be surprised across, the three key elements of the book. Meetings and emails are the first thing that are being attacked, if you will, from the point of view of, come on, yeah, it was exciting when it all began, having emails, having mobile phones, and so on. But we must move on from that because, like I said, the negative impact or negative effect, to use Bruce's term, is just too great now, and that's not what you want at all. Now, something tells me that your choice as well today is a bit of a surprise.
Yes, I'm going to talk about Super Bowl 2022 commercials. Now, I will preface what I'm about to say here by saying that I'm not actually a football fan, neither of UK-style soccer football or American football. I've never even been able to begin to understand how American football works and all the breaks and the way they line up and all of that. So I'm not into the actual sport itself, but from the marketing spectacle, the Super Bowl has always fascinated me because they always have companies paying untold millions of dollars to get into those coveted ad breaks during the Super Bowl. And let's face it, Pascal, 100 million people are watching this. So the potential of getting to your customers by putting an ad in the Super Bowl is just massive. And of course, there's also usually some sort of halftime concert as well, where they usually get somebody very, very famous. In the past, they've had U2 and bands like that. And it's just a massive, massive thing, isn't it? Super Bowl. And this article that I've come across is called The Best Super Bowl 2022 Commercials, and it's by Blair Marnell, and it's on the Digital Trends website. And it's literally just his compilation of about 15 of the best Super Bowl adverts, and he's actually put the links in to each of the ads, which you can then watch via their YouTube links. And the reason I chose this is there are several reasons. The first reason is, all of the marketing experts and gurus are always saying that TV advertising is dead. Traditional marketing is dead. Well, here is an example as to why it isn't, because companies around the world are spending millions of dollars on creating TV ads because this is still one of the hottest spots for getting your message across. And the second thing is the amazing creativity of some of these adverts. We would make the show twice as long if I went through every single one. But honestly, some of these are less like adverts and more like little films. A lot of them reminds me of the John Lewis style adverts at Christmas. Some of them are 2 minutes long. They're filmed like the cinematography and proper scripting and pacing and all of that sort of thing, and special effects. It's remarkable. And I think that we've got to forget about those people who say this style of marketing is dead. Content marketing is dead, email marketing is dead. There's always an audience somewhere. There's still an audience for putting leaflets through people's doors. I still get leaflets coming through my doors from people wanting to clear my gutters. Now, that's not very exciting, but sometimes your gutters get clogged and you need somebody to come and help you get rid of the stuff that's clogging your gutters. And they put leaflets through your doors, and I look at it and think, oh, I've got clogged gutters. The point is, we always come back to this, Pascal. You've got to find out who your customer is and then attract and focus on that customer. And the Super Bowl works, and these adverts prove it. And the rest of the reason for this is just to luxuriate in some of these adverts. I really would encourage everybody watching and listening to the show today to follow the link, which will be in the show notes, and just watch maybe one or two of these ads, and maybe come back to it several times over the course of a couple of weeks, and just really watch the production values, listen for the message, watch for the message, and just marvel at the creativity. The two that I am going to mention, the first one is Evil is Back for Good, and of course it's Austin Powers' greatest villains coming back in a General Motors advert. It's got Dr. Evil in there, etc. It's just really funny. It's a recognisable character. We've all seen him in the films, and the script's funny. The special effects are funny. But the one that actually stood out for me is the Mind Reader. That's the title of this advert, and it's got Scarlett Johansson in it with her real life husband, and it's an advert for Alexa, the Amazon smart speaker. And it's so clever the way they've done this, that Alexa starts to anticipate their needs, turning lights on, turning the fridge on, turning the phone on. And their reactions to it is priceless timing, comedy gold. And I can see why this advert went down an absolute storm. There's also, I said I was only going to talk about two, but there's also one which builds upon the Soprano legacy. There's a Tony Soprano car advert for all electric Chevys. So please do have a look at some of these adverts. It really does make you realize that TV advertising is far from dead. And the last thing I'm going to say about the Super Bowl is a fabulous piece of newsjacking, which I forget about every year, but when the Super Bowl comes round, I get reminded of it. There's a group of people out there who like owls, and they are, wanting to help preserve owls in the wild and make sure that their habitats aren't affected. And their hashtag, they just changed the capital letter of the Super Bowl hashtag. So hashtag Super Bowl at the moment is capital S, capital B. They change the capital B, they make that lowercase, and it becomes a capital O, and the hashtag magically transforms from Super Bowl to superb owl. And I just think that is utter genius.
Fantastic, absolutely right. That's a good example of newsjacking. Do you know what is good about those events? There's something very grounding, because we all need a bit of routine. For me, it's like looking forward to the Cannes Film Festival. It's like looking forward to the Facebook annual conference or the Google annual conference. And I think you're right from a learning point of view. I mean, for you and I to have training materials let's look at this advert and let's break down the storytelling, the how the wit and the characters. I mean, the one that I saw because he was circulated extensively by actually one of the performers was Arnold Schwarzenegger, who played Zeus for one of the electric cars. And that was very funny as well. But you're right, it's on for a good 2.5 minutes.
They're all long. They're all like mini films, and they've been produced like mini films. And to me, that suggests that far from TV advertising being dead, especially in this particular slot, it's worth spending the money on getting people like Scarlett Johansson involved in an advert, because it pays to do it.
Do you know, to me, just to close on that, it goes back to people making very flippant remarks, which is then why they're surprised when marketing is not respected. It's like those messages, move over Facebook, this is a new way to do social media. That kind of really stupid headlines. But it just essentially creates a whole feeling that marketing professionals are full of just, one-liners and kind of almost out of control emotions, as opposed to calmly consider, the approach, the audience, you're right, the medium, the channels, and then come up with the plan, and then have all that kind of capacity for being creative and ingenious.
Yeah, and of course, going back to where we started within the news, maybe one of the reasons why all the other people in the organization question the marketing people, where we don't get the ability to question them, is exactly because of that sort of attitude. So Pascal, now it's time to start getting a bit techie. Let's move on to the next section of the show, which is marketing, tech, and apps. In this part of the show, Pascal and I bring to the table technology, applications, platforms, something that can make our marketing life easier. So Pascal, what tech delights have you got for us this week?
So this week is all to do with you Google CV, an expression that I've used for a few years now, helping my customers take charge of their online reputation and online image in terms of the Google search results. It's not about SEO, just at this stage, Roger. It's more to do with what does it feel like if you are a prospective customer, to see for the first time the page of results. The first one I want to mention is actually a return to Google's right to be forgotten. They recently released a video, which I'm sharing in the show notes, which I think is important. And I'm actually quite intrigued why Google would go back to the theme of right to be forgotten. It's been around for a very, very long time. And I do wonder, Roger, if it's not linked with the things we said in the news about data protection, the EU policy being stricter and so on. But essentially, if you Google yourselves, whether that's your first name and surname or name of your organization, and you feel that the results or some of the results are inadequate, irrelevant, or no longer relevant, or excessive, maybe it's actually somebody else altogether, you can ask Google for the right to be forgotten and for that one result to be removed from essentially your Google CV. I think it's an important exercise to do. I recommend my customers check their Google CV twice a year. You never know. It could be, for example, that an article you wrote 10 years ago still does very well because that website that has published it is performing very well. But you kind of go, do you know what? I've written so many other things since then. That's not quite right. Perhaps a product you don't kind of sell anymore. Maybe indeed you've pivoted, using that term, and your services are very, very different. It might be just the right thing to do to avoid confusion, because it's like when it comes to running a business, Roger, if somebody is a bit confused, then they go from maybe to no, and we want for them to go from maybe to yes. So Google's right to be forgotten, the link in their kind of how-to video is in the show notes. Talking of first impressions and online reputation, I came across a wonderful online monitoring app. So it's literally looking at your names, again, being mentioned on blogs, on forums, on social media, on websites, and so on. And it's called Talk Walker Alerts. So it's like Google Alerts, but a bit sharper, a bit more easy to use, and a more elegant interface. And the idea being that at this stage it's free of charge. It may change, obviously, as it becomes more and more popular, but it seems to be a very, very thorough way of this platform to go out on the interweb and seek out, obviously, reference to your name as an individual or that of your organization. So by matching the two, you can probably start with the Talk Walker Alerts, find, perhaps mention that are now outdated, no longer relevant, and then use the Google's rights to be forgotten to get that listing on the search result to be removed so that the others are given more prominence.
So I can type in Roger Edwards into Talkwalker, and it'll basically show every place that I appear, and presumably anybody else who's called Roger Edwards. I'm not saying there's just me. It will just show me all of the links out there on the web.
It would. And if you discover, for example, a great website with you being referenced, but it's not showing on Google, a couple of things you can do. But to begin with, you can maybe ask for the older ones or the less relevant one to be removed, so that the one you spot, which would be better for your online reputation, to be featured more readily.
Wow, that's interesting. That sounds like it could be a bit of a rabbit hole to go down.
Very
Okay,
true.
this week I'm going to talk about TikTok. Now, I have to say, I don't really use TikTok that much. I sort of dip in and out of it. I haven't got a massive following on TikTok, and I post maybe one video every couple of months. So I'm definitely not a TikTok user. But I did challenge myself, Pascal, to make sure that on the show we do talk about things, even if they're not the sort of things that we use all the time personally ourselves, because out there, people listening to this show may be big TikTok fans, and I want to try and help them as much as I might want to help people who still love Facebook or still love Instagram. So these two apps I came across this week very quickly. The first one is called Trend Talk, and it's actually really interesting. It discovers new trends or viral songs, and as you know, Pascal, TikTok is very much about the music as well as it is about the videos that you put together. The videos often have a popular pop song in the background, and you lip sync to it or you point your fingers to it, that sort of thing. And this app definitely finds the current trends and the hashtags and the viral songs that you might want to jump on to give your brand a bit of a kick. So Trend Talk definitely works. I have messed around with it quite a bit. And secondly, there's another app called Tik Save. Now, we go on a lot about repurposing of content on Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast, and repurposing content is a really good thing to do. And quite a few people I know will download the videos that they've posted to TikTok and then repurpose them for Instagram stories, for example, or they may just even post them on Facebook Messenger. The problem is, once you've put something up on TikTok, they burn the TikTok logo into the video. So if you start your video on TikTok, you've got this logo. So if you then upload it to Instagram later or Facebook Messenger, it will have the TikTok logo in, and everybody will know that this was originally a TikTok and you've just repurposed it. So this little app magically, goodness knows how, magically removes the TikTok logo from your video so that you can then upload it somewhere else and nobody will be any the wiser. Now, you could argue, well, actually, you should make the video first and then upload it to the separate sites separately. But if you've forgotten or anything like that and you want that logo out of the way, then TikSave is worth checking out.
Oh, that's excellent. And I think you're right. What I really like about TikTok is that it does invite people to be creative. Back to that theme again.
Yeah.
It does allow you to try things that other platform would not really be as readily available in terms of the features and functions. But you're right. Once you've created that video message, is it fair they should only be shared on TikTok? You may have an audience on other platforms. So yeah, I think both of them. And you're right. As marketers, it's about also that watching brief, that kind of R&D department where you keep an eye out on what's happening. It may not be for you right now, but actually you might also get some kind of insight into audience and audience behavior that could be serving you well on the other social networks.
Absolutely right. And as we always say, Pascal, these technical marvels, these apps and these platforms sometimes have their roots way back in the past. Some incredible inventor, some brilliant creative mind. So let's set the controls of the TARDIS. Let's fire up the flux capacitor and let's head back in time to this week in history.
And in 1702, the Daily Courant becomes the very first UK daily newspaper. What's even more remarkable, everyone, is that the newspaper owes its existence to a very determined woman, Elizabeth Mallet, the newspaper's first proprietor and editor.
In 1985, Yul Brynner reprised his role in The King and I on stage. He originally starred in the 1956 film version, having originally been in the stage version before that.
In 1997, Netscape announces its third-generation browser to compete against Microsoft on Internet Explorer. The tension between the two companies continued until a federal judge ordered Microsoft to stop bundling its internet software with its Windows operating systems.
Also in 1997, the cult television series Buffy the Vampire Slayer premiered, created by Joss Whedon. The story centered on Buffy Summers, an alternative feminist icon who battles vampires, demons, and other assorted supernatural forces of evil. Wow, that sounds like a really good series. I'll have to watch that.
Oh, absolutely loved. We bought the back. Tell you how old that is. We bought the VHS cassette box set. I mean, it was enormous. There were so many different series. We even got into Angel, the spin-off series and so on. It was just so good. It was witty. It was on occasion quite scary. But also, if you had the pleasure of watching all the series, the thread through from season 1 to season, I think, 12 was quite impressive from a storytelling point of view.
Yeah, now I seem to remember, I mean, this is an example of where the TV series actually became better than the original film that it was based upon, because I seem to remember there was a film called Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which might have had Donald Sutherland in it. I've not looked that up, but that's the memory.
Correct.
Not the same actress. It wasn't Sarah Michelle Gellar in the film, but I don't remember thinking the film was very good. It was quite low budget and it was quite camp. Whereas this series was really good. It had a really good budget, really good storytelling, and as you say, really did hit the spot. Now, let's go back a long time to 1702, the Daily Courant. You were quite excited about this one, Pascal. Why was that?
Oh, a number of things. But to begin with, by the time we publish this episode, will be 24 hours after the International Women's Day. celebrated on the 8th of March. And I thought, is this coincidence? This is not carefully planned. What a joyous news item from history. I didn't know that the first UK daily newspaper was called the Daily Courant, but I didn't know it was actually ran by a woman. Now, what is interesting about 𝗧𝗵𝗲 she must have been such a smart business individual as well as interesting in print. I kind of understood, what the times were. And certainly when people bought the newspaper, the editor would have had a column, or certainly there was a statement, and the editor was called 𝗖𝗫. And as you can imagine, people by and large assume he was a man. Now, she was married to a printer. She was married to a gentleman that obviously probably started the newspaper, who sadly passed away. And she ran the newspaper for at least a few months before she sold it to somebody, perhaps because she discovered that it wasn't for her, or she had other interests. But I just think that in the context of what we're talking about, in the context of International Women's Day and communication, I just love the idea that the very first UK daily newspaper was run by a woman. And I just think it's a wonderful message all around.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something I didn't know. It's a great story. And let's talk very quickly about The King and I. Yul Brynner is a very, very striking actor, completely bald throughout the entirety of his life. I don't think I've ever seen a photograph of Yul Brynner with hair. Obviously, in films like Westworld and Magnificent Seven, so very iconic actor, but probably he's best known for playing the King of Siam in The King and I, both on stage originally in the 1956 film, and then, as the item said here, he reprised that role when he was much older in 1985. And I think that final run again ran for several years, an iconic image of this actor, and it brings back a childhood memory that I've got, because I did like this film. My grandparents liked this film, so if it ever came on TV at Christmas, and don't forget, in those days, there was no VHS tapes or anything like that. You had to wait for it to come on TV. If it ever came on at Christmas, The King and I, we booked a session almost with the grandparents and sat and watched it. My grandfather also had the soundtrack LP. And I remember, for whatever reason, one day somebody accidentally scratched the record almost beyond, so that it was unplayable, that the scratch was so deep. And my grandfather was really upset about this, and he had to order a replacement copy of the LP. And the record shops in those days, it took ages. It seemed like months to get a replacement of this LP. And when it came, it had the same cover, same picture of Yul Brynner on it, the same track listing. But I remember that one of the tracks, and the song was called Getting to Know You, was a lot shorter than we'd remembered it on the original LP. And my grandfather was absolutely bamboozled by this. He said that the song's so much shorter, what's going on? And of course, we didn't know until many, 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 many years later. For whatever reason, that memory got triggered in my mind, and I Googled it. And of course, what happened is that the original copy of the soundtrack that my grandfather had was a very early 33-speed LP, which was actually pressed into very thick plastic. Later, the production process for LPs had changed, and the plastic that the LPs were pressed upon were a lot thinner, and therefore they actually had a less long potential running time on each of the LPs. So quite a lot of very early albums that were released on the thicker stuff eventually had to be edited a bit to get them to fit when the production process changed. And this is one of the songs that they had to chop half of it off in order to get it to fit onto the album. Now, I didn't find out the reason for that until probably 25 years later, when Google came about. And it just goes to show how lucky we are these days to have something like Google, because we can find out those answers immediately, whereas that particular mystery took me 25 years to solve.
And I was just thinking, as I was listening to your story, back in the days, the complexity of producing the newspaper, for 𝗧𝗵𝗲, for example, the complexity of producing those records, there was a skill to it. There was an understanding and a knowledge to it. And I do wonder on occasion, perhaps because I'm very nostalgic about those things, whether the kind of digital first type of industries mentality we are losing. I mean, I know that for a fact. You and I often comment on filmmakers where we are losing out, that generation of people working with print as opposed to digital. So interesting.
Yeah. And we just owe such a debt to those pioneers from the past. I mean, even as far back as 1702, look at the effect that first newspaper will have had on the media in the UK. So let's come straight back to the present, Pascal. Let's move on to our creator shout outs. Well, Pascal, who are you going to talk about this week?
So it's about a book again. I thought I should try and do a bit of a parity here between Content Spotlight and Creator Shout. I'm so delighted to let you know, all of you, that Hilary Dunn has now become the author of the book Step Up, Stand Out, How to Be Seen as the Expert. Now, Hilary Dunn is a consultant for speakers, public speakers, as well as an advisor to event organizers. And in this book, Step Up, Stand Out, she's literally sharing over 25 years of event industry experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as she puts it. And this is a book really for individuals who want to present in a way that is memorable. So it's not just for public speakers, Roger. It's also for, let's say, marketers who somehow have the difficulty to be heard in the office. It's for someone who's a team leader who wants to convey a message to their colleagues. So many different applications, but I think it's just wonderful that she's taken the time to capture all that experience of advising, but also running events into this book. I know she will not mind me saying as well, because she wrote it when she published the news a few weeks ago, that this has been a personal challenge. I mean, you know all too well, Roger, how long it takes in terms of prep and sweat, blood and tears to create a book. And for her, the written form certainly was not an easy format to get through. But she did it, she persevered, and we're now so lucky to be able to access, this wisdom, really, in a form of a book. So it's Hilary Dunn, the author of Step Up, Stand Out.
Fantastic. And Pascal, this week, I'm going to shout out a gentleman called Chris Fox. Now, Chris Fox, I've worked with in and out of big corporate for a few times over the years. We often have a catch up on Zoom from time to time. Chris Fox is really into strategy. Now, I talk about strategy a lot, and we both talk about strategy a lot here on Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast, but most of the time we're talking about marketing strategy. What Chris does is he talks about overall business strategy. And yes, marketing strategy should come from the strategy of the overall business. But sometimes, just like companies don't have marketing strategies, sometimes companies don't even have business strategies. It's not just starting with a mission and values and that sort of thing. It's the whole strategy, the customer experience, the workings of the company. And Chris has this blog which is called Strategic Coffee, the Strategic Coffee blog. And if you want to dive a little bit deeper into strategy, then really well worth checking this website out. Now, let's face it, strategy is one of those words that gets people diving for cover or running out of the room or just being dead scared of it. They have this image of away days in manor houses in the middle of nowhere with millions of post-it notes being stuck on walls and then rearranged, and people talking management speak, mumbo jumbo and jargon and that sort of thing. But Chris makes it simple and he actually makes it interesting. And when you do look at this website and you see some of the articles he's written over the years, you realize how important not only marketing strategy is, which is what I talk about all the time, but the higher level business strategy is incredibly important as well.
Fantastic. Thanks very much for that, Roger.
Yep, some great shout outs this week, Pascal. So here we are, finally, often my favorite part of the show. Shall we move on to film marketing? Oh, this week we're going to be talking about Uncharted. This is a film based upon a video game. Now, I have to admit, I've never heard of the video game. I've never played the video game, so I've never heard of the film. So before we talk about it, before Pascal educates me and hopefully whips me up into a frenzy of excitement about this film, let's watch the trailer.
I've been dreaming about this my whole life. Magellan's gold. It's the biggest treasure that's never been found. 5 billion, easy.
So when do we start?
Yeah, put that in your ear.
Hello? Hello?
I can hear you. I'm sitting right next to you. Your brother believed that there was a final piece.
Wait, you know my brother Sam? What else aren't you telling me?
You have no idea who you partnered with.
Sully! Hurry! It's gonna take a little longer than I thought, kid. I assume we're 50-50, right?
50-50? You get 10%. That's me being generous.
Wow.
Let's find some parachutes.
What?
Unless you know a better way to jump out of a plane.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry! Oh, crap! Come on!
500 years ago, my family found the fortune, then was betrayed. So much blood.
You're doing great, Gene.
This ain't over. Hey, you still with me? Barely!
What's with the cat?
She's just for you.
What?
Life seems super sad.
I'm not gonna keep this thing.
Exclusively in movie theaters.
Well, Roger, welcome to the world of Nathan Drake and Victor Sullivan. Treasure hunting, fighting, guns shooting, jumping over roofs looking for treasures, reading maps and solving riddles. This has been my life for the last 10 years playing the video games Uncharted. And I have to tell you, as a big fan of the game, I am both excited and nervous in equal measures, but I'm curious. You just said a moment ago, because you're not a PlayStation player, this has been an exclusive creation for PlayStation kind of network. How does it feel? Are you excited? Are you okay? You're just wondering what on earth all this fuss is all about?
Well, as I say, I'm not a PlayStation player, so I've never heard of the game. The trailer certainly looks exciting. Certainly looks exciting. I mean, watching it, I can see elements of Indiana Jones in there. I can see elements of Tomb Raider in there. There's one scene in the trailer, very briefly, where they're hanging out of the back of a Hercules-style plane
Yeah.
on a load of cargo netting, which reminded me of a scene in a James Bond film. I think it was The Living Daylights, with the first Timothy Dalton film back in whenever that might have been, 1989 or something like that, earlier than that. But it certainly looks exciting. It looks like a good old-fashioned adventure film.
And back to the scene you picked up, which actually was singled out as part of the marketing campaign. It really is literally like frame by frame a copy of what you do in the film. So you play the character Nathan Drake, who is a descendant of Sir Francis Drake. And actually your story, your life is around finding actually Sir Francis Drake and his treasure. As a way in which to become rich, but also to settle in life, and what is the game has three key elements. The number one is this idea of adventure and going to different countries, a la James Bond. Actually, every chapter you take into different continents and so on. You've got to solve riddles. You have to look at maps and understand what you're looking at. You've got fighting. I mean, literally from empty-hand combat to gunfighting. But you also have the voice acting and the humor, the wit, the one-liners, the tongue-in-cheek, where, for example, you're being chased by literally a tank and you're controlling your character and you can hear the voice going, and I'm nearly there. Oops, oh, no, please don't do this. And then, essentially the tank shoots at you, then an explosion, and your character just literally is being projected off a cliff. And you have to try and grab, a tree on the way down using the different controls and so on. It feels like it's a movie that is being played in real time, and you have some element of control, and it's just so enjoyable. And as you can tell from my description, but also the fans around the world, we just love the character Nathan Drake, invented by a lady called Amy Hennig, who's been a game designer for a very long time. But our kind of wish for the film to do well started actually a long time ago. Sony and PlayStation, by extension, have been talking about making a film version nearly from 10 years ago. And then already there was a campaign of sort from the fan, but also from the actor Nathan Fillion to play the role of Nathan Drake. And one of the things that was really quite uncanny is, I put the pictures for you on the show notes, the fake kind of character, Nathan Drake, looks a lot like Nathan Fillion and vice versa. And actually, they did make a fan film at the time as much as a pitch to the filmmaker saying, come on, don't, please put Nathan Fillion essentially as part of the franchise, the movie version adaptation. And of course, 10 years is a long time. And instead we have Tom Holland. And for the fans, that's tricky. We even have Mark Wahlberg as Sully, Victor Sullivan, who doesn't look and sound anything like the character. And it's tricky, isn't it? I mean, is it important, do you think, for the characters, as in the human beings, to sound and look like the video game characters, or can we just get past that?
I don't really know. I mean, let's face it, when they made films of Tomb Raider, I think they definitely tried to cast actresses who looked like Lara Croft, didn't they? Again, from what I can see of the trailer, the person they have cast, as you said, doesn't look anything like the video game character. And I don't know, is this because I'm thinking of a couple of weeks back when we reviewed Pixels, and you and I absolutely loved that film because we are children of the 80s. We grew up with original video games like Pac-Man and Defender and Space Invaders, and we were therefore the target market. So we were absolutely in rapture about this film, whereas it actually didn't do very well in terms of reviews from everybody else. So are they making this film for players of the game? Or are they making this film because it's just a damn good story and they wanted to have widespread appeal? I think that if they'd have just been making it for the gaming people, that they would have cast somebody who did look like the character. But because they obviously, and I have no knowledge of this, they obviously want this to have mainstream, they want it to become a blockbuster, presumably, then they haven't been concerned about casting somebody who looks like the character in the video game. They just cast somebody who they think will play the role really well.
I think that's a wonderful segue to look at the marketing campaign. Just to quickly add on that, one thing, this is meant to be taking place a few years before the games themselves. So we're looking at a younger Nathan Drake, potentially, because, of course, they want to do more than one. There's already a deal signed with Netflix and Disney Plus to have the movie streamed on those platforms. So the movie was unlucky as well, Uncharted, because they produced it and filmed during the pandemic 2020, and the release has been delayed so many times, like many movies we've had the pleasure of reviewing on Film Marketing. So take us through the campaign itself, and then we can deep dive in some of the details.
Well, it starts off looking as if it's very much like a traditional film marketing campaign. So 21st of October 2021 was the release of the first official trailer, followed on the same day by the website and the social media campaign. I guess that was more of a sort of relaunch, wasn't it? Because some of that already existed. On the 23rd of December, a few days before Christmas, second trailer released. And then into January, they start treating us to actual scenes from the full scenes from the film. So a 2-minute, 30-second action scene with the enticing description. I'm going to read this, Pascal. In the race to find the world's greatest treasure, you have to watch your step. Find out what happens next in Uncharted movie, exclusively in movie theater. So they're giving us a scene which ends on a cliffhanger, and you think, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have to go and see the film to find out what actually happens. And then further into January, we're starting to see featurettes about the incredible stunts in the film. Again, I mentioned them hanging out on cargo nets on the back of the Hercules style plane, or this one's got jets rather than propellers, and I think that's very important, isn't it? The stunts in this film are just absolutely amazing. The sort of Mission Impossible level of stunts going forward, and then we get to the launch in Barcelona, in Spain. Not sure why it was launched in Barcelona.
I can tell you why, because it's part of the experience of Uncharted takes you to different countries and different destinations. But you're right, it was a weird one because it started in Barcelona and ended up in the US. Maybe that was the plan all along.
Yep, so that was launched in Barcelona on the 7th of Feb, and it was released in the UK on the 11th of February, 16th of February in France, 18th of February in the US. So much press and radio coverage. But Pascal, they spent £20 million on this marketing campaign, so I guess that coverage was to be expected. But it certainly does seem to have whipped up a lot of media and attention across the entire world for, again, a game which has been focused on a certain niche of players.
And what is interesting is it feels like a short campaign to me. I mean, there was murmurs, there were teasers and so on across 2020, 2021, but it's almost like a 3-month campaign only, which is always kind of, it feels very daring to me. I wanted to kind of highlight, and so did you, some learning points maybe. And for me, back to your comments about, well, who is it for and how are they going to tackle this? I think they made the decision, perhaps it was made for them, of clear channels of communication to target very clear audience. So Sony Pictures had a campaign, I would say, for mainstream audiences, so those who don't know about the Uncharted, so families, couples, and groups of friends. PlayStation, of course, had their campaign for the game is for me. So if I go on my PlayStation network, there's been adverts by the movie Forever, and you can click on the different icons to play, obviously, trailers and so on. They also had, it's not as extreme as the James Bond franchise, but certainly had some product placement and partners. So you had Hyundai and G Fuel food supplements with their own TV adverts, where literally, well, I was going to say they borrowed Tom Holland. I'm sure he was paid for it, but they had their own adverts with a flair and a feel of Uncharted. Cinema chains, actually, that's interesting. The return to cinema. They organized their own competitions for the local kind of people to win free tickets, but also they had their own exclusive interviews. And you could just imagine being sat there, maybe watching a different film altogether, and there's an interview with Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg with a brand of your local cinema chain. That would have been quite impressive. And then finally, number 5, well, it is 2022 after all, so Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg promoting the film via their social media accounts. Just as a footnote, I did the research, and Tom Holland has nearly 70 million followers on social media, so that's kind of helpful, isn't it?
Yeah, he's a popular guy, isn't he? But I mean, let's face it, they have to keep the game fans happy as much as they need to try and push the audience wider and to appeal to families and other people, as you've said. So what have they done to keep the fans on board? So Nolan North, who you've told me provides the voice of Nathan Drake.
Yes.
For don't video game characters always have incredible names. Lara Croft, Nathan Drake. There's always some sort of cadence to video characters. He's been sharing all sorts of photographs online. He's been involved in chats. So it's a different voice, obviously, in the film, Tom Holland, but they're keeping the fans happy by making sure that the original actors in the game are represented. Tom Holland was one of the presenters at the 2020 Game Awards in December 2020. The Uncharted exclusive clip was introduced by Holland at Sony's CES press conference on the 5th of January 2022. February 2022, they released Creator to Creator video series. Again, Tom Holland and the creators of Uncharted sit down to discuss the process, what that went into adapting the video into film. And again, lots of use of video snippets, featurettes, photography all over Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, etc., etc. So do you think they've done enough to keep people like yourself excited and on board with this?
Yes, I think it was so important to show almost a form of respect. I'm going to be as blunt and direct as this, Roger, because let's be frank, Tom Holland would not be my choice. I wanted Nathan Fillion from 10 years ago, as in I started to get excited about it. It's not the same physical, it's not the same build, it's not the same voice and so on. Okay, I can buy that is a younger Nathan Drake. The only tension for me as a gamer is that the scenes you see on the trailer, they borrow from game 3 and 4. So yeah, it's tricky. as a fan to not see minor flaws or have minor misgivings, but then when you hear, and I think that's important, the power of video, when you see and hear Tom Holland show the respect to actually speak to the video game creators and together how they worked as a partnership to make it work. Because back to you mentioning earlier, they shared that exclusive 2.5-minute video clip of what's happening on the aircraft. Everything is in that 2.5 minutes. It captures the style and the tone of the video game. So as a gamer thinking, oh wow, they've achieved it. The fighting looks like the game. Everything, like the running around and actually running away from danger, and doing it in a way that is very comedic, is also been captured. So yeah, I think it was a very smart move. I think if that was absent from the marketing campaign, they'd been probably in quite a bit of trouble here.
And I was quite attracted to the Instagram account. Instagram account is remarkable in that they've used the Instagram content categories effectively to create all sorts of subsections to the Instagram account. So the Instagram account now it's almost like a mini website in a way. Now, I knew you could do this with Instagram accounts, but they've really taken it quite a long way. So you've got sections about tickets, music partners, talent, the lenses that you can use to overlay yourself with the plane in the background flying through the air. You can share that on social media, but they've also got links to the press, the posters, the treasure maps, the trailers. All of that stuff is available through the Instagram account. I don't think I've ever seen an Instagram account become as segmented as that and as focused. So that's quite impressive.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up, because part of film marketing is about learning points as much as you and I essentially telling people how much we love films. And I think between the audience segmentation from a moment ago, the being aware of where there might be some misgivings and tackling it head on. And now you've got this kind of, well, it's available on Instagram, let's go all in. So the way in which they've used the icons, the way they've organized it, I must confess, for you and I, kind of becoming film marketing historians, that would be just so helpful to go back to in a year's time and recapture that. But I've not had actually the chance to try the Uncharted Instagram lens, but I'm definitely doing that this weekend. And the one thing that we missed, of course, is always a shame about kind of US-centric campaign. Of course, there was a treasure hunt. This is a movie about the treasure hunt. So you had daily video messages from Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg with hints and clues taking you to a different website and Instagram, and then you had to go onto a main website to type in the result of your kind of research and kind of riddles. And then you could win, obviously, some prizes. I think it was quite clever because what you had to find was a secret phrase, which is "fortune favors the ball," which is actually one of the many sentences that they use in the game as well.
And they've actually even done a series of travel vlogs, haven't they, with Tom Holland in it? Again, it's to keep the momentum going, I guess. And because you've already said the game and therefore the film takes place in many locations around the world, this is just an obvious thing to do, isn't it? To keep that travel theme with the star, and that will keep the interest of the potential viewers.
I think that you would appreciate that, you being as well a travel vlogger. My complaint, they're far too short. They're about a minute each. But from a learning point of view, if you just watch them thinking, yeah, I could do that in business, summarizing maybe an event or even a month. So this one was spotted by Chris Thilk from 𝗏𝗏𝗏. So thanks very much, Chris, for that. And you see Tom Holland doing his kind of PR run and publicity runs in London, Spain and Rome, as you mentioned. But the way it's edited, it's really fast. It feels, again, like a mini adventure. So you've got Nathan Drake, we've got his alter ego, oddly, Tom Holland having his own adventure, going to different parts where he doesn't speak the language necessarily. He's a bit lost, and he's having to find his way to the next venue. So that's really, really clever. And just finally, as part of the extended campaign, I was very surprised because, why was I surprised? I'm not sure, but they've essentially done a novelization of the movie. So now you have, as an experience, Roger, you can play the games, you can watch the film, and then now you can read the book as well. And what is interesting about the front cover of that book, it was actually the very first teaser image that was released in late 2021, I reckon, and it is so damn close to the front cover of one of the many video games you can get with the real individuals. So I think, again, a bit of homage stroke respect. So I'll start by asking you the question. Having discussed it with Mina and reviewed the extensive Brian's short marketing campaign, are you looking forward to perhaps watching Uncharted at some stage?
Oh, definitely, definitely. This is one which we'll definitely look out for. I mean, I love that sort of genre, the Indiana Jones, Tomb Raider, that style of thing. Trisha and I watched a series. I can't remember whether it was on Netflix or whether it was on Sky. It was called Hooten and the Lady, which was a couple of adventurers traveling around different locations around the world looking for treasure. So there's elements of that in that series. I don't know whether there was any link between the two, whether it was just a coincidence. So even from the subject matter point of view, I'll be looking out for it. I love the fact that this film will appeal to gamers who will have their own image in their mind as to, they've seen the character in the game, the way they speak. Then there'll be the people who watch the film who've got no knowledge of the film, who will see a different set of actors and voices, but that will be their experience. And even the book that you've just mentioned there, you might read the book having played the game. You might read the book having watched the film. But when you read a book, your mind also creates its own images of what you're experiencing, what's being described in words. So you're almost creating three completely different potential visuals in the head, on the screen, in the game, as well as that. And I actually think that's fascinating. So well done, Pascal. I think you've got me very, very interested here.
And for myself, having discussed it with you and researched the marketing campaign, I feel a lot better. And I'm looking forward to watching Uncharted. The reason I'm going to be happy is because, in fairness to Tom Holland and by extension, of course, the production team, he moves like Nathan Drake. I mean, the stunt, the running, the parkour almost, the empty hand combat and the gunfighting is exactly like the game, and the sense of peril and jeopardy is there. The humor is there between him and Sully. And I think we just need to embrace the fact that, they actually managed to do this during the pandemic, which in itself is quite an achievement. And I suppose for them as well, they should be pleased because we are starting the year with an exciting adventure movie, which almost sets the tone for all the other future cinema releases for this year as well.
Fantastic, Pascal. Thank you so much for suggesting this one. The fact that I knew nothing about it made it a really interesting film marketing session. So everyone, thank you so much for tuning in and watching or listening to Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast, episode 69. As always, do let us know what you think of what we've been talking about. Leave us comments on the YouTube channel or even look us up on Twitter. We'd be delighted to hear from you. So until next time, please go out there and make sure that your marketing is done right. I was Roger Edwards and he was Pascal Fintoni.